Hello, everyone. Um, Before I get started, I think it's really important for you all to know a little bit about me. I know I haven't been in the class long, but it's good to understand my heart behind what I wrote, so that you guys don't think I'm absolutely insane. I am from Montana, aka the mountains. I'm a fifth generation Montanan, so I was raised in nature. I was raised to love nature, to acknowledge nature, and most of all, to love the one that made nature. So much of who I am is derived around that. If you ask anyone, they will say that I know so much about birds and rocks and flowers. I'm always teaching. I'm a hoot to have at an aquarium. As a kid, my mom was always checking my pockets to make sure I wasn't bringing rocks home, hence this lovely chart behind me. It's a delicate balance because as a millennial, most of you know that there are a lot of people that are very new age. I am not one of them. My love of nature definitely helps me to connect to those and that those that are very new age, but it also helps me to show them that there's a creator. So everything is definitely for a purpose. Secondly, about me, I love history. I've always been a history buff. I don't have a great memory at times, but I've always been a huge history buff, which is also why I love the ancient Near East, which leads me into my dissertation. I decided to do an in-depth exegesis or a study on the first two chapters of Genesis, the creation narrative. I tied it in with the ancient Near East and what they believed, all of their creation epics. I read them so that you would not have to, because trust me when I say they are the absolute worst to read. They are gory, they are bloody, they are crude. Not fun. It was a rough couple of months for me, but I persevered and now we're here. On top of ancient Near East epics, I'm a huge language nerd. Doesn't mean I can speak them, but it means I can kind of understand them. So, for each English word we have, there's 10 to 15 Hebrew words, Greek words, Aramaic words. Those languages are so in depth and so descriptive that the English language could not possibly encompass it unless it went into several sentences of intense detail. So that is something I'm really passionate about. The third aspect of my paper is modern science. Again, if you talk to anybody, they will say that I love nature, but gosh, do I not understand a single thing about science? I almost failed every single science class I ever took. It just does not compute up here. But I think it's really important to, understand why modern science says what it says, compare it to what the ancient mind read, and find some common ground. Everything in my dissertation, I love to just share what everyone thinks. I want to show every single possibility for every single belief if possible, so that you can decide what best fits in your heart and aligns with what God is telling you. With that being said, I have a million opinions. I'm not going to use this time to share them all. The only opinion that I want you to know that I have is that an intelligent creation means that there is an intelligent creator, and that's what we will leave it as. So with that, I will kind of define just some small things, and then we're going to get into it. Questions and comments can be at the end. I do also recommend having a Bible nearby. I will try to read portions of Genesis as we go, but it's a lot to jam in an hour and a half, so I recommend following along if possible. When I talk about the ancient Near East, that is a geographical term that refers to early civilizations around and in modern day Middle East. All of the religions of this time were pretty much polytheistic. I'm just going to kind of round it out and say they all pretty much believed in numerous gods. And because of all of these religions, there was no shortage of creation epics. I chose, like 4 or 5 to talk about, but know that there are many, many more, even in not just the ancient Near East, but even in ancient North America, ancient Asia, ancient Australia, all of it. Like there's a million, and I'm not going to go into all of them. But what I think is interesting is that they all kind of have the same themes. And I just think it's beautiful. I think it's really cool what God has done. Like I said, English is kind of a flawed language to be translated into because it's so cut and dry, and there's only so many words we can put in before it's just a big old run-on sentence. A lot of Semitic languages had multiple terms for complex meanings. So the Bible and its translation is really up to whoever is translating it and whoever is interpreting it. Nothing that I'm adding or saying when we start reading Genesis means that that is the correct translation and every other translation is wrong. That is not what it means. What I aim to do is to basically expand what God is trying to say. It's just adding more detail. Everything I am telling you from here on out is supplemental. It is not legalistic to read ancient Near East. It is not legalistic to try to understand ancient cultures. We have to understand who the ancient audience was to bring a better context to it. Like I said, intelligent creation requires an intelligent creator. It does not nullify anything by saying that. God is insanely smart. I can't even comprehend like how he could do anything. And that alone, should, that's the end of my dissertation. God's smart, the end, Science does not take away from God. God created science, like bottom up, like that's what he did. So, there you go. Getting to it, Genesis 1 and 2 have a very specific structure. They all go day by day. In day, just as a kind of a summarization, day 1 and 2, God created light and separated it from the darkness. He named them both day and night, and then created the sky above and separated it from the waters below, named it heaven. Days 3 through 6, God created dry land and seas, vegetation, stars, birds, mammals, and finally man. The 7th day was the creation of rest, or the Sabbath. And the rest of Genesis 2 just returns back to the 6th day to go into more detail. That has a lot of opinions, but that's just what we're going to call it for now. So I'm going to very briefly go over some ancient Near East creation epics with you, just so you can kind of compare and contrast as we go along. Something important to note is that in the ancient world, all religions believed that their purpose for existing was to labor endlessly for their gods. They believed it was their job to care for the gods, and in return, perhaps the gods would take care of them, but even then that was kind of iffy. It was clear in their literature that these gods would never come down to earth because they were confined to the cosmos, even though that was kind of their end goal, was to do as much good as possible so that the gods would live amongst them. But alas, did not work. There was nothing was seen as supernatural. Everything and everyone was birthed from the gods in an ancient perspective. So it automatically pretty much implied that anyone in the ancient world believed in something, believed in a higher power. It was ridiculous to think otherwise. Doesn't mean that there weren't people that didn't think that, but most everyone did. The other important thing to understand is in the ancient world, for something to exist, it needed to have a function or a name. So for instance, if a god created grass, it was only grass. But when they named vegetation, it created grass and gave it a really important function of, being more than just a ground covering. To the ancient people, it was really important to understand the why behind everything, even though they had no idea why. Everyone's just doing their best to guess. So I'm just going to go over a couple of creation epics. I'm just going to kind of tell you just a little summary. There is an Egyptian one called the Memphite Theology of Creation. It is not the most common one. The most common one, what we think of today, is the creator Ra, who was the sun god, created everyone. This one was lesser known and basically said that there was a god named Ptah who created everything. It also says that Ptah gave control to basically a body of gods to then pronounce with their lips and heart the name of everything, thus giving it function, as I just mentioned. It also says later on in that same epic that Ptah, the creator god of this epic, was satisfied after he made all things and all divine words. So that's important. Another one was called the Deluge, which was a Sumerian myth. This one is most often compared to Noah's flood in Exodus. But for right now, we're just going to be talking about the creation portion. It says that in the deluge that the gods created vegetation that luxuriated from the earth. Animals, four-legged creatures of the plain, were brought artfully into existence, and they founded the 5 cities. There's another Sumerian piece that basically talks about how the earth was empty without food or animals, and that the inhabitants walked around naked. And so the gods created food and sheep and grain and something else to give humans a means to survive. So the Sumerian people as a whole pretty much believed that their identity was rooted in slavery and endless punishment. Essentially, the gods weren't even going to really give them the grain and the sheep until they begged, basically. So very sad, a bit different than ours. There's another one that is a Babylonian incantation. It's actually referenced a lot in dental school. It's called The Worm and the Toothache. It's pretty funny, but the beginning of it is basically a domino effect where this god Anu created heaven, heaven created the earth created the rivers created the canals had created the marsh, and the marsh created the worm. Shows kind of a domino effect. The fourth one is a Babylonian theology. It just starts with in the beginning. There you go. That's what you need to know. Enuma Elish is the most popular one, which was a Babylonian epic. This one was so rough to read. It has 9 or 10 or probably 12 tablets, all incredibly difficult to translate. It basically summarized everything was created from a series of god wars. So as you can imagine, very bloody, kind of like the movie 300, I would say, pretty close to that. Some comparisons, it says in Enuma Elish, it starts with the heavens above did not exist and earth beneath had not come into being, meaning that nothing existed before that moment. After everything was created, it also says that the gods saw it and were jubilantly happy, and then blessed the god that was in charge of creating. An important one, just to compare to mankind, which hopefully we'll go over in day 6, was Exegesis, which was a Babylonian myth. The main thing to get out of this is the gods were annoyed and tired. They were tired of working. They didn't want to work anymore. So it is repeated and rephrased at least 7 different times that these gods were creating humans to bear the yoke, create the man to bear the yoke. So they created man by mixing clay with flesh and blood to make a god and man combined. However, did not give man any kind of godliness, and instead they were created solely to be slaves. So there is that. That is the summation of everything. I do not recommend reading them. If you want to know more, I can definitely give you some references so you can read it yourself, but I do not recommend it. On to modern creation. There's pretty much two different routes you can go with, creationist or evolutionist. It's either you believe in something creating everything, or you believe that something just happened to be created. All over the world, other than the ancient Near East, people believed in one or the other most of the time. It was creationism. You take Greece, for example. The ancient Greeks believed that the world emerged from nothingness and chaos, which led Zeus and Uranus and Gaia to create, reproduce, battle, and then create some more. Here in North America, a lot of ancient native tribes believed that a god fell from the sky and was trapped on Earth, and so the Earth then rose up to take care of the god. That god was normally called Sky Woman. Really beautiful stories, and they all are kind of relatively similar all over North America and Canada, and so that's kind of interesting. So in that way, they were kind of creationists without even knowing it, I guess. For the sake of what I will be describing, we're just going to say that creationism is going to be through kind of a fundamentalist Christian minded backed lens, kind of an anti-science mindset. That does not mean that every creationist is anti-science. We're just going to kind of go kind of extremes here. And same with evolutionists. I'm just going to say it from kind of an atheistic scope. So an only science mindset, it's just a little bit easier to kind of understand what each party believes. For creationism, it is quite literally the antithesis of evolution. It says that, as I said earlier, intelligent creation requires an intelligent creator. They believe that all things are dependent upon someone that lives independently. So, aka God, whoever. There's kind of two major points that I'm going to talk about. One is the age of the earth, and the other are people, just generalized. As far as the age of the earth, most creationists believe that the earth is somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. They used to calculate this through generational segments of the Old Testament. So they would take, Adam was 930 years when he died, and his son Seth lived for 912. And then they would do all that math, I guess because they hated themselves and really liked math. I would never do that. That's way too much work. They have kind of different processes of figuring that out today, but for the most part, that's kind of how they began to come up with the age of the earth. They also use places like the Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon to point to a possibility of young earth. The Great Unconformity is essentially a piece of sandstone that is about 1 to 2 billion years old that they've calculated through carbon dating. And directly on top of it is another piece of sandstone that is about 570 million years old. So they point to this as saying, either your processes of carbon dating are significantly wrong, or suddenly a lot of rock, specifically 430 million years of rock just suddenly went missing. It does not denote evidence for a young earth belief, but it certainly demonstrates a potential flaw in what scientists consider old earth evidence. So take what you will from that. As far as people, creationists, again, just from kind of a science or a Christian backed mindset, they believe that Adam and Eve were the first and only people on earth, and therefore all of mankind are descendants of them. This brings up some issues, though. It brings up issues of incest, different races, skin colors. It just leads to a fountain of questions. I will say it is entirely possible to believe in both, the mother and father of humanity, Adam and Eve, while also believing that God created numerous other people, but using Adam and Eve as a way to kind of be a starting point in Israel's genealogy. There's so many different ways you can view everything. At the end of the day, Genesis does not list every single plant, animal, or star that was created, but instead, specifically signifies the grand scheme of creation. It shows the function of each thing that was created. That was what was important, what was the order and what was created specifically for mankind. What didn't really matter is if Adam and Eve were the only people, but it's a brilliant way to start the genealogy for Israel and who they became as people. For evolutionism, science can only be proved when there's physical evidence through the scientific process. A lot of what they believe cannot be proved. It's a lot of just assumption. They, as a whole, believe that creationism cannot be observed in the natural world, and therefore it cannot be true. I think we all could probably debate that one, but evolutionists also claim that all of creation began with a collection of singularity, formerly known as the Big Bang. Basically, the Big Bang created all life as we know it, and evolved over long periods of time. As far as the age of the Earth, they believe that the Earth is around 4.5 billion years old, while the universe is significantly older. They figured that out through carbon dating, and then they figure out how old the universe is by calculating velocities of galaxies. I read a whole scientific paper on it. Don't ask me to explain it. I'm not gonna, because I can't. I don't understand it, and I don't need to, because that is above my pay grade. What should be known, though, I guess, about the age of the Earth, just different things. Places like where I'm from in Glacier National Park, there are rocks that are dated around 950 million years old. Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming have rocks in it that are 4 billion years old. But as previously said, carbon dating cannot always be entirely accurate, so take with that what you will. As far as humans, evolutionists believe in both microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is defined as small changes that occur over periods of time, like bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics, which we've seen. Macroevolution is defined as small changes that occur within a species over longer periods of time on a bigger scale, like certain crops being created to be disease resistant, but also in human evolution. So, everyone knows that, evolutionists believe that, we developed slowly over time from primate-esque species. However, something that I really did not know, partially because I never really cared to know, even though we have a lot in common with apes, appearance, skull shape, little bit of intelligence, they do have some feeling. They don't have any proof. They have incomplete skulls, fossils, it's like partial skulls that they found, just like parts of a jawline or parts of a skull. They also cannot figure out why the fossil record comes up empty when trying to put them into the specific timeline that they say that these creatures were created in. It also does not make any sense why it took millions of years for our ancestors to evolve, but it only took 300 years for basic human inventions like farming equipment, vehicles, and the internet, all in, 300 years. It's kind of wild. So with all of that in mind, we're going to move on to the first day. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, this is Bereshith Elohim bara et Zaim et Eres. Bereshit is the Hebrew phrase for in the beginning. It is not translated wrong. I would like to point that out first. However, Bereshit, the Hebrew word reshit, can also be translated as chief, best. It is meant to be, in the Hebrew language, it is meant to be something that is perceived as very important or something that is principal. So again, in the beginning is not the wrong translation, but it can also mean that this is an important and fundamental truth. It's portraying that you need to pay attention to what is about to be said because it is a fundamental and important truth. This Bereshit word also comes from a root that means to shake or to vibrate, which I find very interesting because the Big Bang claims that the universe was created from, the singularities that in a sense vibrated and caused the universe to expand. I will say my best friend from Montana was here this last weekend, and she is the smartest science mind you'll ever meet in your whole life. And she had said something very interesting to me. She had said that she always thought it was really interesting that the order in which evolution says that everything was created was also the order in which God created. It's interesting. She's a Christian. I'm a Christian. Let's just leave it and say that it's interesting. So, like I said, vibration, super cool. In a way, the small Hebrew word, meaning vibrate, gives both the ancient and the modern world the universe's function. It brings kind of a perfect balance of understanding of, saying in the beginning of everything. That's it, beginning of everything. It doesn't need to be time. It doesn't need to be people. It doesn't need to be food. It's just in the beginning, just straight up in the beginning. This is a definitive statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It exists. It alludes to God existing before anything. Obviously, it's incredibly difficult for us to even comprehend a God, anything existing before anything existing, because we imagine time to be on a horizontal scale. This is the start, this is the end. There's nothing before then. But theologically and obviously, there has to be a beginning and there has to be an end. That's how time works. The important thing of in the beginning, God created, it shows that God did not use any previously existing materials when he created the universe. If in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and it was only God, that means that there was only God. He didn't have a hammer. He didn't have nails. He had himself and the power of his words. It is a fundamental principle in our faith and also in Jewish faith. The fact that it was God alone, that's immediately different from any ancient Near East perspective. It was always a group of gods or one God creating more gods and then them becoming a big group. It was always a community activity to create. But the fact that God was alone and existing and he created everything by himself was absolutely unheard of. It was insane for, this group of Hebrews to believe in one God when all of their pagan neighbors, believed that it was a whole group. That would have been wild, for anyone to believe. So it's interesting to think about because it's not something that you would normally think about when you read in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You would not think about the fact that ancient people, the Hebrew people, were the only ones really to believe in one God, one singular God. The name of God in the creation epic is Elohim. We all know Elohim. It's repeated 31 times in the creation story and 2,600 other times in the entire Old Testament. It is his proper title. It is also plural. It is not pointing to Jesus or the Trinity, though today we can read it as that. The ancient people, though, would have read it as a way of honoring. In the Hebrew language, to turn a noun plural was just a form of revering someone or something. It was just a way to bring honor to something that they could not bring honor to otherwise. So it's solely singular in meaning in the Hebrew. This doesn't mean that obviously Jesus wasn't there but in the ancient context, this is what they would have read. The Hebrew term bara, which is create, can mean shape, create, form, but it's only things of divine nature. It is repeated 6 times in the creation story as a reforming or a renewing. It is also repeated 55 times in the entire Old Testament, which shows that God always had a plan for divine creation. He always had a plan for divine action. And what did he borrow? What did he create? He created the heavens and the earth. The heavens, samayim, comes from a root that means to be lofty. In our mind, we read God created the heavens, or the place that we go to after we die, and the earth, the place that we're physically in. Historically, the Hebrew people would not have considered that a destination after death. They read samayim as the visible sky above. In the Hebrew language, there is not a word to describe heaven as, a destination or where God lives. There was no word. So this noun literally means the visible sky above. So this just then again points to this first line in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, as a summary of what is about to happen. It doesn't mean that this is correct by any means. It could be read a million different ways. However, I think it is best seen as a summary of, hey guys, pay attention. This is a fundamental truth. God created the heavens and the earth. Now let me tell you how he did it. Moving on to Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. In ancient Near East context, for something to be formless and empty, without form and void, as the New King James Version puts it, it was just a situation that was chaotic and confusing, just a situation that lacked order. This was God's way of saying, I see something that needs order. Now I'm going to give it order. Darkness was upon the deep. Where did the darkness come from? I had someone ask me, did God create the darkness? I think instead we need to switch our perspective as to why was there darkness? What is darkness? Darkness is just the absence of light. For something to exist in the ancient world, it must have a function, and therefore the function of darkness must be to give purpose to the light. The word used for spirit, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The word used for spirit was ruah, meaning wind, breath, spirit, mind. We read this today as the Holy Spirit. Ancient audience would not have read it as that. They would have seen it instead as God's power or God's presence, but never something, not God himself, but just his presence. In modern Jewish culture, they read it as like a dove hovering over the nest, which I thought was really beautiful. The water that the Spirit was hovering over. This is really important. The Hebrew word for water is mayim. It is translated as temporary waters. This is the same word that is used in Exodus 14 when it describes the Hebrews walking through the Red Sea after being freed from Egypt. The mayim was a wall that God put through the Red Sea, a wall to the left and to the right as a protection, as a way to guide the people through. By God saying that, his Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters, it is giving the ancient people a sense of protection and a sense of God's power. The ancient world was deathly afraid of water, like cats, okay? They were so scared of water. Water was chaos. They could not control it. And so by God saying that his power was hovering over the thing that scared them the most, it was trying to prove to them how powerful God really was. It carries a weight of a God who has no ulterior motive but to protect the ones he loved and guide them through the Red Sea. The rest of the first day, God creates light. He says, let there be light, and there was light. God said Elohim Amar means the one true God who promises or commands something. The word Amar can also be to express the action of being proud or boasting, which some could say is God's audible voice. However, it is also referred to as the first utterance in Jewish culture, the first utterance of God uttering creation into being. To utter something is completely different than to be proud or boasting. It means to just quietly whisper, light. It just shows how little effort it took for God to create, but also how purposeful it was. His words are distinctive and they are poignant, and they will do what he says they will do. It was very common in the ancient Near East for, gods to speak things into existence. We saw that in the Egyptian epic that I read to you, parts of it, and also in Numa Elish, they named things. But it was just very, very important for people to hear that God spoke these things. It's even in Mayan stories, ancient Mayan stories, which I thought was really, really interesting, and I'll get to that later. The light was good. God saw that it was good. Elohim Ra'ah Kitob. It means that something is functioning exactly as it should. That is how the ancient world saw it. It does not imply perfection. It means that it is what is best for the situation. It is God's opinion. The root of the word tob, which is the word good in this instance, is something that is pleasing, joyful, favorable. God saw what he had made, and he was pleased to know that it was beneficial. He separated the light from the darkness. Badal is the word for divide, which means to separate or sever. He severed the darkness from the light, and it allowed the light to shine brightly without interference. He gave creation two names, therefore assigning them an important function in the ancient people's minds. It was the rhythm of life. It was what we still use today. Our bodies, our human bodies, rely on light to keep its circadian rhythm. We're kind of like flowers in that way. We wake up when the sun is up and we go to sleep when the sun is down. We have a rhythm, and it's beautiful. The second day is one of the most confusing days ever. It is the firmament. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I could go forever talking about the firmament. This word is the worst. Nobody uses it today. Nobody can understand why they would choose this word. That's so confusing. But firmament simply means a vault of heaven that supports the waters above. To explain this a little bit better, we know it today as the sky. But the modern people saw the sky above as a dome. They saw it as a solid dome that held back the waters from above, aka the rain, tornadoes, I guess. I don't know the issues that they had in that day, but it held back the waters, and it was where the gods lived. This unseen layer, this little dome. The firmament was quite literally the sky above, and it was almost a protective layer. In ancient contexts, they might have seen this as a protective layer, from God's judgment, because if something crazy happened, like a tornado or a sandstorm or, an earthquake happened, they would think that was God's judgment. It's just simply a dome, a little protection, a little umbrella, or a tent. David in Psalms refers to it as a tent. He uses the firmament to separate waters from waters, meaning the waters in the sky from the waters below. This is just a very confusing way of describing weather. He created layers upon layers of atmosphere, and they all have very specific purposes, but the most important purpose is one layer protects us from, the sun's harmful, rays of light, and the closest layer to us is what makes it possible for photosynthesis to occur. It's what is literally home to all weather functions. It's what gives us the food that our food eats. It's what gives us our food in general. It is kind of the beginning of life, for God to separate waters from waters. We are made up of like 98% water. So it's really important for us to have that division and understand what the firmament is. Again, I know it's confusing, and when you read more into it, it gets less confusing, or more at times if you read too much, but the firmament is just the sky and weather. To kind of summarize, day one, God pretty much created the aspect of time. He gave us the ability to have day and night, which in the ancient world, that was time. That was how to tell time in days, months, years. And in day two, he created weather. So it was only, necessary to then create the third thing that people needed. They had time, they had weather, and now it was time to create food. So on the third day, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. The dry land was then home to plants, animals, humans. We'll get to that later. But it is very important that we understand that the third day was to give us the ability to have food. Everything was done with mankind in mind. It was not done with anyone else in mind but mankind. And that is exactly how the ancient people would have read it. Maybe because they're selfish, hard to say, everything revolves around them, right? But for something to exist, they needed it to be relational to them. And we're not much different. Honestly, we're not much different. It's kind of like, when someone's pregnant and they're choosing names for their child, they are choosing a name that will fit them and hopefully be what their life will be about. My full name is Nicole, and Nicole means victory of the people. And so that is my purpose, is to give victory to the people. We're no different than the ancient people in that way. Every name, everything that was existed needed a purpose, needed a function. So by God letting the land appear, he gave way to a lot. He gave way to land being able to give back to us. Something that I find really interesting is the idea of earthing. If you've never heard of earthing, it's also referred to as grounding sometimes. It is exactly what you do when you walk outside without shoes on. You feel the earth beneath your feet. There are studies behind this that show that the human body, when in contact with the earth's surface, has profoundly positive effects on our nervous system, immune system, every single thing, even respiratory systems. It's huge. It produces amazing effects that relate to inflammation, immune responses, wound healing, chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. In a way, we see someone without shoes on and we'll be like, oh, what a hippie, what a tree hugger. But joke's on us, because they have a better connection to the earth than we do. Not saying that you should walk around in a grocery store without shoes on. Please put your shoes on. But walk outside in your backyard with no shoes on and you'll feel closer to the earth. We're better than all of creation, but we were meant to be in creation. And by having that contact, it allows us to just be just even an inch closer to God. And I know that sounds wild, but do it and you'll see what I mean. This also kind of brings up, God made it so that dry land could appear. There's not a lot of detail in Genesis, obviously. So this doesn't necessarily point away to the idea of Pangea. If you don't know what Pangea is, it was just one massive continent, apparently, that every other continent, kind of formed out of. There is a lot of interesting evidence for Pangea. There's a lot of interesting evidence against Pangea. Regardless of what you believe, though, he created dry land. It means that he created fault lines. It means that he created mountains, valleys, prairies. The fault lines allowed, the land the ability to grow toward the heavens. Obviously, growing up in Montana, I was surrounded by mountains all the time. And there's never a moment that I wouldn't look at them and just be in awe. Um, I grew up, basically about 2 hours from Glacier National Park. In college, I went to Glacier National Park every single weekend at some points, back when it was free. And it never ceased to amaze me. Me and my best friend we went and backpacked through the Grand Tetons in Wyoming. And when we first got there, it was, I don't know why it's going to make me cry, but it was so awe-inspiring to see how tall these mountains were, and that our God, it was just like, whoop, dry land, done. Well, it's amazing. And the level of detail that he put into all of it is mind-blowing. He didn't just create mountains, though. He created, sand dunes. He created, mountains in the ocean. No one talks about that, how there's giant valleys and mountains in the ocean. I'm not going to go down there and see them personally. I have a real affinity for swimming, but they're there. I've heard about them and they're amazing. Just the thought that someone could have commanded the earth to create these formations leaves us starstruck. And in a way, I believe that God did that on purpose. He wanted us to see something always in the distance and be reminded that he is there. He's the one pulling things up out of the ground. He's the one that created. Once the dry land appeared, he brought forth plants, but not just any plants. He brought forth plants that are self-pollinating, meaning they require no labor, absolutely no labor. The other interesting thing is that, God, when he created, when he told the earth to bring forth plants, he therefore also created the color green. He created chlorophyll, which weirdly enough has a really similar chemical structure as hemoglobin, which is vital for human life. He created this beautiful color green, and when we see green, we see life. That's why green in the ancient Egyptian world was this sign of fertility, this sign of beauty, because where is green, there is life. Along with green, it was trees, it was shrubs, it was everything, and all of this was intelligent. Something even as mundane as grass has learned to grow from the base because we always chop it at the top. How crazy is that? That grass is smart. Doesn't mean that it has a heart or anything like that, but it's smart. It can figure it out. I love trees. I love trees so much. And they are beyond intelligent. There's certain kinds of birch trees, especially in German forests, that have numerous species of fungus surrounding their root systems, and it creates almost a communication between their roots and other trees' roots. And they use this communication to let each other know when they're in trouble or when they're dying, and they all signal to each other that that tree needs help. Trees were literally created to be dependent on community. And it completely nixes the idea of survival of the fittest, because if trees are helping out each other and they can't speak, they can't speak. As far as I'm aware, I've seen Pocahontas, I'm aware of what Grandmother Willow did, but they don't speak. And the fact that they can talk to each other through fungus, of all things, is crazy. They can even tell each other when a drought is coming. They can feel when a drought is coming so that they can prepare and basically hold more water and more nutrients in preparation of that. Even if you lay on the ground up into the space of trees, you will see that the trees never touch each other. they always kind of interlock, and they know when to stop growing. All kinds of trees, every single tree possible, they all know when to stop growing as to not impede on each other's sunlight, to not impede on each other's space so that they can get enough oxygen to survive. Even maple trees have little tiny bacteria in them that can essentially measure the light every day, and they keep a calendar. They keep an internal calendar. I can't even keep a calendar, but these little tiny bacterias in these maple trees can keep a calendar. It's amazing. I could go on forever, but I'm not going to, because I'm not going to bore you guys. It is the first instance of God blessing something. God creates vegetation, and he gives it a cultural blessing to go sow with intention for his creation. The ones that will need it the most. And he says, go with the newly created wind I made, and go release your seeds everywhere. A good God provided a good land for a good people. The fourth day is a big one, so I'm not going to read it all, but essentially, God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven for 4 major purposes. One was for signs, one was for seasons, one was for days, and one was for distinguishing day and night and time. There we go. Did them backwards. It's fine. These lights in the firmament of heaven would have been the sun, moon, and stars, and it goes on to kind of talk about it. It is important to talk about, though, on the first day of creation, God created light to abolish the darkness, as we talked about. Light's function was to bring order and to give an ability to understand time. But because of this verbiage, because of the Hebrew grammar, this does not necessarily mean that God created the sun on the first day. It is a little bit confusing, because why would God create plants and then create sun when the plants need the sun to survive? It's very possible that there's a million explanations for this. But the best thing that we can do as modern readers is to understand that it is written simply for a simple people. Mic drop. They were created for signs. The lights in the firmament were created for signs. Warning, proof. It can mean miraculous signs. At the end of the day, these signs were not, meant to be, scary signs that oracles in the ancient times would have used, but instead as a way for God to show pieces of his existence to people who needed the proof. It's very similar to Exodus 7 when Moses uses the rod to show God's power with signs and wonders. It's not meant to scare the people. It's meant to prove his existence. It's meant to show, hey, I'm still around. That's all it is. It was really important, though, for the ancient people to know this, because they saw the stars in the sky, the sun, the moon, all as gods. They saw them all as gods, and they saw them as all things that, were basically they were almost slaves to these lights, when in all reality God created them to almost be slaves to us. They're not slaves, but they were created for us, if you understand what I'm saying. The other one was seasons. This can for sure refer to winter, fall, spring, but it is better realized as a way to understand when the feasts would happen later on in Deuteronomy. God was already setting up the Mosaic covenant before the people even needed it. It might sound small here, but it shows that he knew and still created mankind, even though the fall would happen, even though the people would be freed and see miracles of God and yet still do what they did in the wilderness and wander. It shows that he would still create a mankind even when, honestly, they really didn't deserve it. It shows that he created the stars and the sun and the moon to be the sign that God still cared. The final functions were to help tell time, to dictate months, days, even years. It's kind of a fun fact to know that they do not list the sun and the moon specifically. They say the greater light and the lesser light. This is because the Hebrew words for those two things are actually exactly the same as the sun and moon gods of Mesopotamia. So they specifically did not list the sun being pronounced as Shemesh and the moon pronounced as Uriah, because it closely resembled Shemesh and Uriah, who were sun and moon gods. So if you've ever wondered why they didn't just say sun and moon, that's why. God didn't want anything to do with that. In a way, everything was brought as a connecting point. That's the key to evangelism, is community, it's relationship, it's understanding that there's other people who believe other things, and being able to use what you know to help people to figure out who God is. That was a really bad way of explaining evangelism, but it just shows that God was almost connecting two opposite worlds as a way of communicating, as a way of relating. All of creation is knit together incredibly tight. It's woven like a blanket. It's kind of crazy. Today we know that the sun was given 3 very specific responsibilities of feeding plants, creating warmth, helping mankind flourish. That even crickets can tell what temperature is outside. That's how tightly woven everything is. You can calculate how warm or cold it is by basically listening to how many cricket chirps there are in 15 seconds and then multiplying it by 40. How wild is that? That God was like, okay, how about every 15 seconds you chirp however warm it is, and then we'll just make sure someone can figure out to multiply it times 40 and they'll see how cool I am, right? Like who thinks of that? I wouldn't think of that. The irony of the sun is that if we don't have sun, we can get sad. And that's not just the feeling, that is the seasonal affective disorder. It's the sad feeling we get when the sun doesn't shine and we can't figure out, why am I feeling so sad? It's because the sun's not out. You're not depressed, it's because the sun's not out. Go outside, you're a flower, get some sun. They also, science now knows that the moon was created to control tides through gravitational pull and regulate the axis of the earth. Everything was just very ornately made. The one striking thing about the 4th day was that God created the stars, but it was an afterthought. It was like God created the sun, the moon, and also the stars. This was specifically done for a reason. The stars were seen as having power. Specific constellations meant that certain gods were in charge of things. And so by God saying, and also the stars, it was just a way of, telling the ancient world, I created them. They're just there to serve me. They wouldn't even be around if I hadn't spoken them into existence. And it's kind of meant to be, at least to the ancient world, kind of perceived as like a jab to the Egyptians, that they would believe in all these stars. But it's just beautiful how God kind of thought ahead of the times. For the end of the 4th day, I will say, even the most brilliant scientists have all figured out who God is. They've all figured out that intelligent creation requires an intelligent creator. I found this quote by Isaac Newton, and he said, the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Pretty cool. The fifth day, this is when it starts to get really juicy. Fifth day, God brings forth abundantly moving creatures of the water that are full of life. The waters, like I had said before, were already a mysterious place, especially in the eyes of the ancient Near East. So if God brought further creation to the waters, it would theoretically make it less foreboding, less scary. But he specifically says to create water animals that have life, the Hebrew word nephesh. It refers to an intelligent living being with an emotional soul. It's seen through octopuses that can camouflage themselves as a hunting method. It is seen as thousands of fish that can swim in those crazy patterns to basically scare away their predators. It's crazy. God knew that, creation without intelligence was dull. And so he gave them a soul and he told them to go multiply. He said, let's make it interesting for the people that are gonna, probably eat you. Adding to the command of water creatures, God also created birds who fly in the open firmament of heaven. This is meant to be incredibly poetic. The open firmament of heaven. The word for open, panim, which is the word face in this instance, or open, is most often used in scripture when referred to God's presence. This might have been because, the ancient peoples thought that the birds were closer to God because they were flying, in the firmament. But they also believe that, God's throne was basically above the firmament. So having this be like very poetic, like allow the birds to be closest to you. It was just a fancy way of saying, let the birds fly. And this means that it was seabirds. It was birds that are, the final factor in water ecosystems. Are the ones that forage for fish and then are foraged by sharks. They're kind of the complete circle for an ecosystem. With just one command, he created these ecosystems, and they're all connected, just like the plants are to the trees, to the animals. All things are connected. For instance, without sharks, and I watched a documentary that basically talked about certain sharks would leave areas if they didn't have proper nutrients, and if they left those areas, those reefs, those areas would die ecologically within the water. Even otters help keep heavy areas at bay. And they basically, so otters will eat urchins. Urchins kill kelp. So if otters eat the urchins, the kelp won't die and the ecosystem stays flourishing. It's like this crazy circle of, otters being cute, eating urchins, little scary urchins. I don't understand how they eat them because they're really pokey, but it's a domino effect. And that's what God did. Everything is meant to be moving in a rhythm, in a cycle. These birds that were created, they weren't just seabirds. They were all birds in general. It's all birds that fly. It also means all marine life. Kelp, urchin, seaweed, algae, bioluminescence, life forms without the nephesh, without the living soul, without the intelligent emotional soul. They still have a huge role in ecosystems. They take ocean algae, they produce the oxygen, that marine organisms need. They're the main source for fish. Everything is so intertwined, and it shows an intelligent creator. So God says, let great whales be created. This word for whales, which is, the translation is always a little bit different every single time, but it's the word tanin. It can mean 5 different things. 2 don't exist anymore, but it can mean dragons, serpents, sea monsters, venomous snakes, or one very specific kind of dinosaur. It's really hard to say, but this word has also been used in Exodus 7, when God turned Aaron's rod into a snake to prove his existence to Pharaoh. That snake was a tanim. So God used the word abundant. He said, let everything come forth abundantly, the water creatures and the birds. Abundant can refer obviously to the fertility of the animals. There's like 3.5 trillion fish in the world. But it can also just mean, the layers of the ocean. I'm not going to go into them, but there's like 5 or 6 layers of the ocean. Each one inhabits life. Each one is there for a specific purpose. And each one has incredibly intelligent species. Not like us smart, but pretty smart for, fish. Like I'd said, it is also all birds, not just seabirds like albatross or seagulls, but all birds, which I love birds. I love birds. You can't see it, but there is a little chickadee right over here I have framed. I love birds. Birds are beautiful. Birds are referenced so many times in the Bible. You guys can probably think of at least 5 or 6, but they are magnificent, and it's one of, I think, God's favorite ways of showing his humor. You think about, I don't know if you know what sandhill cranes are, but they are hilarious little birds. I call them Neds because they look like they would be named Ned. They're incredibly awkward. They're long. They have long necks. They do these funny dances to mate with each other. But the best part is that they are known for their thunderous snoring. They snore so loud, and it just shows how funny God is that he would create these awkward birds that just migrate up and down North America, but they snore. They need little nasal strips or something. It's crazy. It's just, God's hilarious. So God created all of that, and he blessed them. He blessed them. The Jewish people say that the blessing was because humans were going to hunt them and eat them. So they needed the blessing as protection. And I love that. And it's a perfect way to end the 5th day. The 6th day, he creates the rest of the land animals. He says, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. So this also could mean dinosaurs. Didn't think I was going to bring it up, did you? There are a million opinions with dinosaurs. I think dinosaurs are amazing. I love going to museums and seeing all the bones, and the fact that they were probably covered in feathers is hilarious to me, that they would be so scary and, hunt everything, but they look like giant chickens with a lot of teeth. I think that's hilarious. Firstly, with dinosaurs, it's important that, we remember God did not name every single thing that was created. He didn't list, every single type of tree, every single type of flower. He just said, cattle, things on the ground, things on the land. It's also important to remember that the Bible does not specify how long the days of creation were. So again, this ties into, evolutionists believe that, dinosaurs lived, like 500 million years ago and lived for a long time, then died by a giant meteor. Creationists, some believe that dinosaurs were created 6,000 years ago, along with the earth and humans, and lived alongside humans. There's a million different options, but bottom line, I think it would be silly to say that dinosaurs didn't exist, because how mighty are they? It shows that God is so creative and can create something that would bring joy for thousands of people to come. And even their name, it comes from a Greek word meaning fearfully great. They were never meant to be, like a distraction. I heard a lot of times, especially growing up, that dinosaurs were placed by Satan as a distraction tactic. And I think it's so silly because it just shows God's creative mind that he would create a creation like this. So with this, God also created the land ecosystem. So, he created all the water ecosystems, got that taken care of, and now he's going to finish the land ecosystems. It included different land formations and climates, rainforests, savannas, forests in general, Arctics, and each one just shows how much they can flourish, how much land can flourish. Rainforest can, for example, can hold up to like 1,500 flowering plants, 750 species of trees, 150 species of butterflies, all in like a 4 square mile patch of land. That's crazy. And they can hold up to 70% of medicinal plants that cure cancer. It just shows how much he can jam pack into one little area. 4 square miles is not very much. All the ecosystems were filled with flora and fauna, and God saw that it was good. He saw it was ready. He saw, it's time to create the thing I most want to create, which brings us to Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And so God created man. It was the pinnacle of creation. And you can tell when you read it. When you read all of Genesis out loud, you can feel the triumphant moment of God that he finally gets to create the thing that he's wanted the most. The reason why he created everything else. You can feel that momentum build up. It's the climax of the story. The account of Genesis has to meet the ancient people at least halfway in a lot of things. A lot of ancient cultures believed in a heavenly court or a council. And so by him saying, "Let us make man in our image," that is also pointing to a council. Not going to go into that too much, but that is what it is pointing to. It would not have been read as the Trinity as we read it now, or can read it now. It would have pointed to a council. He made man in God's image after his likeness. It covers the entirety of a human. It means the mental, spiritual, and physical being of God that we are meant to be similar to. We can process feelings, we can think critically and coherently, we have creative intelligence like God, we have a moral compass. We are completely different than the rest of creation. Being made in the image of God and the likeness of God was the Old Testament's version of on earth as it is in heaven. We were meant to have dominion. We were meant to have dominion and rule. The one thing that's repeated 3 times in Genesis is God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created him. The original Hebrew would have actually read, God divinely created mankind in his image. In his image, God divinely created, male and female divinely created. It points to a divine stamp of completion. That is the only major thing that is missing in our creation epic, is that the translation is not, it's fine, but it's missing the divine aspect. He divinely created us. And then he chose to bless us. That was his second blessing. And it was a 5-fold blessing. He said to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion over everything. He gave us the ability to be his representative on the ground. I compared this to the ancient Near East story Exegesis, where the gods were lazy, and so they created man to be their slave. How much different is it that we have a creator God, the God of the Hebrews, who wanted humans and wanted them so that he could care for them, so that he could be with them relationally, and give everything to them. That is how our gospel is different. That is how our creation story is different. It shows a God that saw that we were good and innately good. On the seventh day, God created rest. Not much that I have to say about this. He created the joy of rest. Though it's not really talking about sleep, sleep can be very holy. I think it's not a coincidence that we pretty much need at least 7 hours of sleep. 7 is a biblical number, meaning fullness or completeness. I don't think that's a coincidence. The Jewish people keep the Sabbath religiously. It's very much a law. For us, it is not a law, but it should be tradition. And that's why it was so funny that Nancy told all of us that one of our, assignments this year was to take Sabbath, because I love Sabbath. I eat Sabbath for dinner. I love Sabbath. There are multiple studies on this, and the medical effects it can have on the body and the mind. There was a study done by Duke University that showed subjects who observed Sabbath 3 to 4 days a month resulted in better rest, had lower life chaos scores, meaning that their organization and ability to plan for the future was easier. They had higher spiritual well-being scores, higher quality of life scores, and their mental health flourished. They also had a less likelihood of being depressed or burnt out in everyday life. Sabbath is not just for our spiritual health, it is for our physical health. It also can apply to land. We are called to allow land to rest for a year. There's a lot of studies behind this that it shows that the earth was meant to replenish itself, and you're meant to give it a year to rest it. But obviously, Sabbath is merely talking about humans in this instance, this divine rest that we're meant to have. But it is also pointing towards the laws that will be put into place later on for the Jewish people. Moving on to Genesis 2, the rest of it. That was the end of chapter 1. Genesis 2 starts with, these are the accounts of the heavens and the earth. The accounts or generations can also translate to genealogy. God had told me right when I thought of the idea for my dissertation that he wanted to show that Genesis was a genealogy for his people. And it was really funny then when I looked into the Hebrew and saw that it actually literally means genealogy. Every time that Hebrew word is used, it's meant to reference genealogical lines, all of those really long, drawn out chapters in the Old Testament of whose dad was who and everything else. But it just shows how thought through everything was. And it also came full circle for the entire Genesis account. It started with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it ended with, this is the account of the heavens and the earth. This is the genealogy of the heavens and the earth. The rest of chapter 2 is an in-depth look at the sixth day. There are a lot of opinions about the rest of chapter 2, but for time's sake, we're going to say that it is an in-depth look at the sixth day, and we're going to leave it at that. God created man out of dust. Dust cannot be shaped. Dust is not fertile. Dust means death. The word for death or for dust actually means ashes or debris. So it legitimately points to something that isn't worth spending time in. But God chose to use his breath to create man out of dust and to breathe life into him. The breath, nesama, is meant to be, the word means like a woman who is panting in labor. And the word for breathing into his nostrils, af, means to breathe hard. Sometimes we think about God creating very like peacefully and like, oh, let there be life. But no, God blew his holy breath into man and said, have purpose, have function, have life. You are living fully and you are living intensely starting now. It was never like it was peaceful, but it also wasn't peaceful because it had the purpose of God on it. Humankind is unlike any creation. We know that. Internally, we have like 100 million, 100,000 miles of blood vessels if you line them all up. Every second, our body creates 25 million cells. We are intelligent. Inwardly and outwardly, everything about us is intelligent. Our organs were meant to mend and repair without any external help. Lungs are proven to get better if someone stops smoking. They can heal themselves. The most beautiful thing, though, is that one of the building blocks for us being created, is something called laminin. If you've never heard of it, it's spelled Laminin. They are the building blocks of all cells. And guess what they're shaped like? A little tiny cross. They're shaped like a cross. I'll let you assume what you want to from that, but that's pretty neat. So with the breath of God in his lungs, man becomes a living soul. Hey, nefesh. This phrase holds a lot of weight in Genesis. God created things with living souls was like a top priority, but this soul was the most important. And this soul, this man was given a garden. The garden was not named Eden. The garden was in Eden. Common misconception. The word for garden insinuates an actual garden or an enclosure that is used to cover, to surround, and to preserve. The garden was created exactly to do that. It was meant to cover and surround and preserve God's presence among his people. His presence is key in understanding the Garden of Eden, especially when you get into chapter 3. Once he created the garden with all the rivers that flowed out of it and everything else, he talked about setting man in the garden to work and preserve it, and that there were 2 trees. One was the tree of life, and the other was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life, hay, symbolized a renewal or revival. The life is the Hebrew word hay. While the tree of knowledge, the word for knowledge is da'at, symbolized a sort of judgment. These 2 trees were the opposites of each other in a spiritual sense. One would lead you to being made new, while the other would give you the ability to both judge and be judged. Both trees were representations of the human spirit in our struggle with God. It can be summarized as this. He basically was telling Adam that he could choose the tree of life and live with God as a renewed and restored creation who was in continual relationship with him, or choose the tree of knowledge and decide whether or not to be refined in the fire and cultivate that relationship with God himself. It's not to say that if he chose the tree of knowledge that it would make it a one-sided relationship, but it would cut off man from 24-hour access to God. We all know how it ended in the fall. So obviously he chose a poor choice, but he chose it. He was sentenced to death. It said specifically in Genesis 2 that if he chose the tree of knowledge, he would be sentenced to death. This term for death can also be translated as something being executed, but not in the way of like an execution of death. It was also meant as executing a plan or carrying out a sentence to death. A course of action put in place by God is what it was implying. And, you know, even from the beginning, God had that plan in place. It was a course of action that was so unbelievable that no one would see it coming. The course of action that would basically restore the relationship between God and man. And this course of action was obviously put into place, and the sentence was carried out in 33 AD. Plot twist, bet you didn't see that one coming. The end of Genesis 2 is the creation of woman. It is the only ancient Near East account to ever mention the creation of woman. Now, something I would like to mention is that this idea that women were seen as property in the ancient Near East is completely false. It was Mesopotamian culture that saw women as assets. They were given protection through laws and security measures. They were given really big roles as priestesses. They were not primarily objectified. This idea, this victimization of women has been happening for a very long time, and that shouldn't be the case. It's not the truth. It's not the biblical truth. It is also not historically true. It does not mean that stuff doesn't happen now, but historically, this was not the beginning of, the objectification of woman. It was not the beginning at all. It was not good for a man to be alone. So he searched out for his helpmeet, and God allowed him to name all of the creatures in an effort of trying to figure out who was going to be his helpmeet. Now, this does not mean that if Adam said, you know what, I think a cow would be a great helpmeet. That does not mean that God would let him choose a cow as a wife. He was allowing God was allowing Adam to grow accustomed to the world around him. He was allowing him to kind of feel that something was missing, that his counterpart was missing. He would not have let a cow be his wife. That's just, he would not have let that happen. Woman was created out of the rib of Adam. We have 24 ribs total. I really love biblical numbers. I think they're really interesting. And so hopefully you can follow along with this. But there are 24 ribs in each human being. 24 symbolizes priesthood, okay? Each has 12 ribs on each side. 12 represents God's power and authority. So by God taking one of Adam's ribs and turning the 12 into 11, it symbolized a future and ultimate harmony. God was hinting to mankind that finding a helpmeet brings harmony to the soul. 11 symbolizes a future and an ultimate harmony. And so, God took one out of Adam, but he created the rest of us with 24 ribs to remind us that we have a responsibility to God and a responsibility to his land. It was just a way to point back to our priesthood. The account ends with Adam and Eve being naked and unashamed. We read that and we just think, oh, they're unashamed because they don't know that being naked is weird or something. This word, this Hebrew word for unashamed, which is bus, means to not be disappointed. And that's where I would like to end us for today. God created them as naked and unashamed, and they were not disappointed in their situation. They had a pretty good life up until this point. Adam and Eve, the man and woman, were both naked and were not ashamed. They were not disappointed with creation. And that is how we are meant to see creation. We're not meant to see it as disappointed. Something that is very, obvious today is that we abuse our land, that we do not put the care and respect into it when God specifically ordained us to have dominion and take care of his land. And I'm not a crazy tree hugger hippie gal, but don't litter. Grow a garden, talk to the birds, tell them how beautiful they are. Speak to plants. When you speak to them, it's a scientific thing where if you speak life to a plant, it will grow. If you speak death to a plant, it will die. It is a very real thing. Speak life into creation. That is what we are called to do, is to speak life into creation. God created it all for us. And so if there's anything that you get out of this, it's that we are meant to do more with what is around us. And also, open up blue letter Bibles sometimes. Look into the Hebrew words, see the depth that they hold. Because writing this dissertation really truly blessed me in more ways than I can ever count.
Thank you so much, Nikki Hudson. Could you please pray for us?
Sure. Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for these people. Thank you for your creation. We thank you for your ability to create out of nothing. We thank you for the intelligence in the creation and the intelligence of you, the creator. I pray that all of us take a second look at the trees around us, at the grass that we walk on. You know, the idea of stopping to smell the roses is very much real, and I pray that over all of us, that we never take it for granted, that we understand that the past can always help the future, that everything comes full circle, and we thank you for everything. Amen.
Oh, this is so good. I know a lot of people are going to want to have comments and give comments to you on this, Nikki. Great job. I had a couple questions I figured that people might be asking, and when they headed off at the past. Why do you feel like ancient Near East is important to understand? You started to allude to that, but is there anything else you want to add to? Why is it important?
I mean, it's kind of like today, you know, I think it's really important to understand what other religions today believe, and it's the same for the past. I have personally read the Quran, I have read the Buddhist teachings, I have read all of it, and it's not because I've been searching for faith, it's because I want to understand how ours stands out. And it's the same way with culture. You know, we have plenty of phrases that no one would understand today, and the ancient Near East, all of their writings and epics and traditions all help us understand phrases and cultural things of that day that we wouldn't understand otherwise. It's like when someone says, "You're all that in a bag of chips." If someone 2,000 years from now read something like that, they'd say, "What? Number one, what is a bag of chips? And number two, why are they like a bag of chips?" There needs to be some kind of like contextual information to go along with it. And so it should never be seen as legalistic, and it should never be seen as anything other than supplemental information. It's
Well,
always to add to what God is doing,
and
never to detract.
so if anybody hasn't read the epics, it's really hard to read those. And thank you, Nikki, for giving us the ability to read your paper and not have to read the epics. So it's just, we really appreciate that. One more, I have a couple more, but I'm just gonna ask one more because I know a lot of people have comments. Ancient Near East function and purpose. I love that because that's the language of Hebrew too, right, as well. Hebrew, the language is function, right? Just the same as ancient Near East. Anything to expound upon that? What does it mean? Function and purpose.
I mean, I think it's the main just to get out of it is that um, for something to exist, for something to have purpose, it had to have a name. And ancient culture, in all of the epics, all the gods would pronounce the name of things. They would have it, or they would tell another god to pronounce it. Something that I don't think I read was there's a Mayan creation epic, and it's hilarious, but it basically starts with it is said that in the beginning there was emptiness. The divine beings, the great thinkers, imagined the world into existence simply by saying its name. So obviously, names are really influential and important. It's pretty funny because at the end it says that the Mayans were created by a mix of cornmeal and water, so basically walking tortillas, and I love it. It's hilarious. My is actually descendant of Mayan, and so I told him I'm going to tell him that forever. I'm like, you're just a walking tortilla. How dare you? But how much fun is that? I love that.
That's so good. Well, it's in Hebrew. That tells you why there's such power on the language. There's power on Hebrew. There's power. It's the same thing. It's a function, right? You're calling a name. It's a creation. I love that. All right, I could talk all day and ask all day, George, and then we're going to open it up. You have comments and questions.
Yes, great job, Nikki. It was refreshing. It's really refreshing to hear it from your heart and your voice instead of reading it on the page. But that was really good too. It was really delightful. You know, we know that the word of God is inspired by the Holy Spirit, that it's inerrant. from the beginning to the end. And there's so much life in it and so much symbolism and meaning for us as we hunger and search for the truth. And you did a great job comparing things. I love how, you talk about the ancient Near East, other religions and the multi-theism aspect so that they would know that it was relevant then, but it's relevant now just as well. And your coverage of creationism and evolutionary thoughts help bring out the point. So this is a great summary. I'm sure that the people who read your book will be blessed and enlightened to understand picture, the different streams, the different backgrounds. And then I don't know, it's like, who was it? Frank Turek that wrote the book, or maybe someone else. It takes more faith to be an atheist, because if anybody really just admires the creation by our Creator, how can they not believe that there was an intelligent Creator that had every detail worked out, even to the minutest detail, that there's so much that we still don't know, but what we do know is undeniable proof of the wisdom of God from outside of time, that he created time and he spoke life and light into the creation of the universe. And it's just amazing. It's always such a great reminder, and you great reminders of how great is our God and how infinite is he and how limitless he is. So great job. Great job.
Amen. Who's next? Comments? Go ahead, Kelly.
Nikki, I just loved everything about this. And I'm not sure what to say and what to leave out, because there's just so much, but it was so good, and it's so needed. And I know that you are already reaching people with these messages and just the heart that you have. But I think it's just going to expand, and I hope that you're planning to write a book, because I think it's really needed. And I just believe with you that the pieces that you need to pull out and put into that book, you're just going to know that you know. And I think, like, for me, like my family, we are, and the creation evolution has been a huge topic in our home for years, and so this really resonated with me. There are resources out there that talk about creation evolution, but I don't think in the same light, in the same way. At least I have not seen them. And so I think there's been resources that we as a family have actually been looking for and have not found. And I think that you have really keyed in and narrowed in on that topic and how to approach it in a way that is really for today. And so thank you for doing this. Thank you for digging in and reading the things that we don't have to read. But it's so good. As far as the barefoot thing, my family, for the most part, we've been wearing entirely barefoot shoes since 2015. And so I completely say yes and amen, connecting with the earth in that way. But it's so good for your body too. But anyways, that's a whole nother thing. I look forward to meeting you. I hope you're at grad. I think you are. And my daughter's coming with us, and she is a nature artist and paints birds and other things too. My dad also is a nature artist, carved birds, and so I get it. And I'm excited for you to meet her too. The other thing I took note of, one last thing that I took note of was, I think it's really key that there's this anointing and a purpose and a calling that you have to have read the other religions that you did read about. I've preached it, and I believe it, that we are to for the most part zero in on the truth, zero in on not on the counterfeit. But I also believe that there are people who are called to dig into these things. when we're not called to dig in, it can get dangerous, as we've seen, but you've been called to dig into these things for us. And that is really, really huge. And I love that you even added the science part to it. I felt called to, in the last couple of years, to, well, I'm a certified neuroscience coach. This has been a bit of a problem, I think, for a lot of people who know me as a Christian, as a pastor. Why would I be digging into neuroscience? And so I love it that you touched on that it isn't, you know what I mean? And so I think God's calling a lot of people right now to combine that and to bring an understanding, a deeper understanding to it. So thank you so much for your work. I need a moment too. So thank you, Nikki.
So awesome. Karen, jump in. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we could all have a really long talk about all this and go on all night long, because there's so many interesting things here. And I want to jump in on something Kelly said that I think is so important. And the more I'm doing my PhD studies, the more I'm realizing fields of study there are within biblical studies. It is so vast. No one person can do it all. So I'm so thankful, Nikki, that you take the time. And one of the reasons I think that you take the time is something I found in another scholar I was reading. I didn't understand why he was coming across in a certain way. And then the Lord helped me see he was called to defend Christianity. He was called to defend the scriptures. And he had to study some of these other things in order to be able to defend the scriptures to those scholars who would stand up against him and give him all these arguments, because by studying it out, then he could really stand on the truth and stand on what was right and have very strong arguments. And so I think it's really good that you took the time to read what the rest of us probably don't really want to have to, unless we have to. If we have to, we do. But that's your contribution that I think is very significant. I have two things. I want to ask you a question when I end, because I think your answer is important for you and for all of us to hear. But I want to share with you, you touched a little bit on the cosmos, the greater creation. And now with the James Webb Telescope, I think what is happening, I don't know if you all are hearing this, they sent up this amazing telescope, which is a very unique design and everything. And they're getting much more information about the creation of the universe. And what it's doing is it's popping holes in all their theories. And all of a sudden they're saying, oh no, we don't know if we can stand on the Big Bang theory or not. Maybe it's right, but boy, the James Webb Telescope is giving us information that we don't know if the Big Bang really happened because of all these other facts. And they're even saying we have to go back and learn more about physics. We don't even understand physics the way we thought it should be. It doesn't add up to us. And I believe this is one of the mysteries and the things of God that confounds those that think they're wise, and he's finally given them enough technology so he can say, you think you know, but you don't know. You don't know what you think you know. And there's so much more that I think we're going to see over the next decade as they gather more and more information. We're going to see new books about the creation of the cosmos, the creation of the universe, and new thoughts. And some of them are coming to the reality that there is a creator, a divine creator, an intelligent designer, however you want to say it, because the information that's coming back to them is so vastly different than what they expected. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I love it because God is God, and his word says that he will make those things foolish, that he will reveal that. But I want to ask you, Nikki, as we've heard all this, and we've just been able to learn a little bit about you in class, I'm really interested more like, you shared with us why you chose this topic, but you didn't really kind of share with us where you think you're going and how is this pertinent to what the Lord is doing? What is the next step? Can you take just a moment and share with us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been called to write and teach, whatever capacity that. I already have a whole series lined out for, I guess, study materials for those who aren't educated and study materials for those that are. I pretty much hate every single book I've ever bought because it is written for people who have a brain that can memorize the entire dictionary. And I just, I have a decent vocabulary, but not that big of one. So that's very much my goal in life, is to write and to teach. And very much with all of these topics, I'm always the one that happens to befriend the Satanist and the atheist, and all of this only helps kind of explain how I see the world. So that's my end goal.
Well, I want to take just a few seconds right now to bless you in the things that God has ahead for you, in that writing, in that teaching, in the anointing, in the ministry. I see a calling on your life, and I speak blessings, and I ask that the Lord bring you up into that next level, and that your life will be a greater impact than you ever imagined it might be.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen.
Amen.
Kuzan, you have something. Thank you. Amen.
Yeah, I think that I enjoy your what you shared. When we came from South Africa, Europe, confronted with evolution dominates the Western education system. And so almost every person you talk to, in evolution. And so in South Africa, they don't have evolution in school. And even though they had the picture of the monkey that becomes a human, they just skipped that part. They didn't teach it. And so working in a university, it's all these educated young professors. And one day when I talked to one, and my point of evangelism was to kind of convince them that, about God and the gospel and everything. But the professor said that it's not for you to prove that God exists. It's for us to prove that he does not exist. And that kind of changed my way how I talk with people. And by studying really deeply and the flaws, and then also study and comparing the two and challenging them to look at both. And because I said, how can you make a decision if you only study 50% of the science and you don't study the other 50%? And it have helped. I think what you're writing about is there is a whole generations of people who have been bombarded by education. And so in many Christian circles, you have Christians that believe in evolution, and that creation is, they don't really believe that this is how it happened. And so I think it's important for defending the gospel that you have a good understanding of creation. So I think this topic of yours is really important and relevant, especially for the Western church.
Amen. Nikki, do you have any comment on that? Or go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree fully. I was actually taught many times in high school about evolution, and I could never really understand why, because there was no proof really for it. So it's definitely important to shed more light on the fact that there's not that much proof. So there's actually none, pretty much. So.
Amen. Go ahead, Jolie. You got a comment.
Thanks. I just want to say, Nikki, write that book. Because I just feel like there is so much evolution out there, and we need as much counter evolution, thought-provoking, thought out, line upon line works like yours was, of the logical reason that creation exists or is the way. So yeah. So write that book, Nikki.
Actually, I think it's a series, don't you? It's a series, and with workbooks. I'm looking for the workbooks too and everything else. Yeah. Great detail. And the fact that you went into all the ancient Near East, you kind of summed it all up. Anybody else, other comments? AJ, you got a comment. You came in a little late, but welcome. Oh, Emily has one. And then what, AJ? Go ahead, Emily.
Nikki, this is my cup of tea. I love this. Back when we started talking about apologetics, there is so much out there now that God has just revealed so much through his knowledge of science to people that are true seekers to truly just disprove evolution. I mean, it's mathematically impossible for macroevolution to occur at a cellular level, and that most mutations don't cause things to get better. They cause illnesses and things to get worse. So there's just so much out there. And I think what you said, when you said, in the beginning, God, if we can get people to that, in the beginning, God, then who is this God we need to be accountable to? Who is this God that we need to be accountable to? Because he is if he's God and in the beginning, we better know about him. So this is just such a wonderful topic. There's so much out there about it. I love how you know so much about nature. It was just wonderful. But I have to ask one selfish question. What part of Montana were you from? Because my daughter and son-in-law were in Montana.
I'm from everywhere. I'm originally from a little town about 30 miles south of the Canadian border, but I spent a lot of time in Missoula.
Okay.
So I'm from everywhere.
Okay, in Hamilton. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful area.
Montana's beautiful. It's its beauty that took them away from our family. But anyway, and that's where God led them. It's a beautiful place. So thank you so much. I can't wait for the book and for the workbook and everything else that you're going to do, because it's a huge need, because most of the people I know that are atheists and teach evolution or whatever, it's not that they really believe it. It's just they don't want God to be who he says that he is, so but anyway, thank you so much. I loved it. Thank you.
This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Go ahead, AJ.
Well, I do have one huge question, Nikki. Why did you not invite your previous class?
I was embarrassed. I don't want you guys to come out of your way. I was also going to invite Patsy, but
No,
also I
awesome.
thought I would just stumble the whole time. So there's that.
Fair enough. We don't want to make you stumble or cry, but no, I know I speak on behalf of all of us, is that we're so proud of you for persevering and pressing through this whole journey. And what you presented here today was just amazing, so rich and so full of revelation. My favorite comment every year is always when you know that someone has received true revelation, when they say something, but behind it is so many more layers that unfold. And I think a little bit that I heard towards the end, what really jumped out for me was when God breathed into Adam, it was like labor, like the breath of labor. And then because there's obviously me and my wife, we believe in supernatural childbirth without the pain and the disappointment. And you touched on that, how God told them that, or in their nakedness, that they weren't disappointed. And if you look into the world, and even if you imagine what Adam and Eve must have felt like after the fall, was probably mostly disappointment. And Jesus came to restore everything that they lost, so we can now walk in that place of not being disappointed. And yeah, I think if you talk to most people, it's disappointment. That's the biggest issue. So I think there's a huge key just in that. So I just honor that. I think it's cool. And I love the 24 ribs, the 12 and the 12, heaven and earth, perfect government. There's such a, this is, in that there's just so much in itself. So please write a book on heaven and earth and perfect government and 24. So, and please send a signed copy to New Zealand. We want to see your book. Please.
Yeah, I remember.
Amen.
I remember somebody did a paper on the 24 too, by the way. Do you remember that, Nikki? Somebody we know worked on that 24. Oh, that was a big study. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, this is like evidence that you're a forerunner of the younger generation, Nikki, and it proves the evolution of revelation. Jesus said, "These shall you do," and we're going to see it through you and the younger generation and even our generation in the days ahead. So God bless you.
This has been awesome. Anybody else have anything they want to say or share? Any other comments?
Sorry, I just have to jump in for a second. I experienced supernatural childbirth, so I wasn't going to say anything, but when you mentioned that, I absolutely experienced it. So sometime maybe I'll get to tell my story. But I wanted to say to Nikki that the calling of God on your life. So the scripture that comes to mind is creation itself is groaning, longing for the revelation of the sons of God. And, Jesus said to Herod, he said, "Go tell that fox Herod, today and tomorrow I do cures that are perfected." And so what I feel about your work is that you have a calling that reaches into the age to come. And part of that calling, the reason you had to study ancient Near East is because that's going to all be flipped and overturned. And there are still remnants of that in the earth that you'll need to overcome. So you had to look at that, much as we all hate looking at that stuff, but you had to see it so that you'll know what to do when the time comes. So there you go. That's my word.
Oh, I can feel the power of God on that. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Anybody else have anything? It's awesome. It's been awesome, hasn't it? Awesome night. Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody. Anything else? Shoo. Oh, wow. Well, George, you want to go ahead and close this out? Everybody thinks that Nikki passes. Everybody, yeah, amen. She passes. Congratulations. We still have a little bit to do, but thank you. Congratulations. Dr. George, take it away. Take us home.
Yes, thank you, Lord, for you taking us to your home, Lord, in your heart, in your throne room, where we can come boldly with confidence to receive mercy and find grace in time of need. Lord, that we are seated in heavenly places with you, high above the fray, high above the clutter and the clouds and the darkness and evil, in that place of joy, Lord. And we thank you for seeing you smile over each one, Lord, as you laugh over Nikki and you delight in her and you delight in each one. You call us your delightsomeness, Lord, and we say, here we are. Use us, Lord, for every moment, every purpose, every decision that you have made before the foundation of the world, that we would fulfill, because you are faithful to complete every work that you started in us, Lord. And we give you the glory and praise and honor as we worship you in all that we do. And we thank you for the reason we were born and you created us was to enjoy you, Lord, and to worship you. And Father, we're hungry for more of your joy, and let us bring smiles to your face, Lord, by faith, as we desire to see you smile and be joyful every day, Lord, as you pour your joy into us, our strength from you, Lord. Amen. God bless you all. See you next week. Woo!
With Jake Reddycop, doctoral candidate.
This is a true reality show series.
And thank you also. Thank you so much to Nikki's parents here. And Nikki, you want to, your parents' names? You want to just, you don't have to show your faces if you don't want, but we're glad you're here.
They're watching on the TV, but Richard and Janine.
Richard and Janine, welcome.
Richard and Janine, welcome. You can be proud of your wisdom-filled daughter in Nikki.
Yes, we're so proud of her too.
We'll all be at graduation, so I get to come to North Carolina.
Good. Well, we'll see y'all next week. God bless you. And thank you so much, Nikki.
Bless
Bye,
you all.
everyone.
Love you.